Hey guys, and welcome back to the internet. So have you ever been on some hiking trip that didn't end up going so well? Well, we're going to be hearing a lot of stories like that from the AskReddit question of, what has been your scariest hiking experience? Now, these probably aren't going to be the type of scary stories that involve paranormal events or creepy stalkers, but they should be pretty interesting. I lost my balance and fell off the trail down a cliff, broke my left ankle, dislocated my right shoulder and elbow, came to when it started downpouring. Some kind of animal came and sniffed me, but I was face down. I must have startled it when I moaned trying to move because it took off. I crawled down about 200 yards when I came to a trailhead. A park ranger saw me and radioed for help. She put my arm in a sling and stabilized my leg, gave me some water, airlifted to a hospital from there. Geez, I've had some pretty bad encounters while hiking, but I'm glad I haven't ever been stranded with an injury. So when I was about 7, one of the kids in my neighborhood had told me that he knew his way around the woods and hiking trails by my house. I was a kid and had nothing better to do that day, so I convinced my mom that we'd be fine. After all, my friend knew where we were going. I said we wouldn't go far, and we'd be back in an hour or two, and then off we went. Spoiler alert, he did not actually know where the F he was going. We realized we were lost after a couple hours, and the logical solution to 7-year-old us appeared to be wander around and hope we get lucky and found the trailhead we came in through. We wandered for a few more hours, gradually losing hope as the sun began to set. I can remember being completely panicked and convinced myself I was never going to see my family again. Eventually, and freaking luckily, we came across a guy who had been out for a sunset hike, and he actually had a map. And he knew where he was going. He walked us back to the entrance of my house in the dark. I made it home, safe to an angry mother who was about 5 seconds from calling the cops. Man, I'm glad I'm really good at not getting lost at places. So I was going on an overnight hike in a small wooded valley that has lots of smaller connecting valleys coming off of it. I just crested one hill to find out a grass fire that I thought was small was huge and headed my way. I ended up having to run, and as I came to the edge, it was about a 100-foot drop, so I was running parallel with the fire, looking for a safe way to get down. I eventually got to a slope I could slide down and escape. Once I got to the bottom, I found out the tarp I was carrying under my pack was actually melted a bit on one side. I left and did not spend the night. Wow, dang, this is like some Indiana Jones Daredevil kind of story. So there's an old abandoned road behind my house that winds down the mountain besides the ski hills. It was abandoned because no one lived on it, and it was costing the town too much money to maintain it, but it's a cool spot to go hiking now. One day I was hiking down towards the river at the bottom of the road. It was fall, so all the leaves were off, and it was very bright in the woods. I came around a corner to a section of the road that was washed out, so I was focusing more on my footing than my surroundings, but something caught my eye. I look up and there's a cougar frozen in fear about 10 feet away from me. It was probably thinking the same thing I was. Holy F, now what do I do? So we just sit there staring at each other for a minute or two, when suddenly a stick cracks behind me, which makes me jump, which scares the cougar. The thing scrambles to turn around and just runs like a house cat and disappears into the trees. I turned around to see what made the noise. It's a deer. A freaking deer scared off a cougar by stepping on a stick. Granted, if I wasn't there to put the cougar on edge already, that deer probably would have been dead, and similarly, if that deer hadn't been there, the situation may not have ended as well for me. So we all survived based on sheer luck. Yeah, I was gonna say, if a cougar is afraid of the deer, it's probably not gonna survive too long. So I was hiking down a trail in the dead of winter, along a stream. At one point, the trail narrowed to about 4 feet wide. With a steep slope on one side and a sheer drop of 10 feet to the creek on the other side, the trail was coated in a sheet of ice. So being cautious, I got down on all fours to crawl across the patch of ice. Not good enough. I felt my body sliding slowly towards the edge. I felt suspended in midair before I fell. It reminded me of Wile E., Coyote from the Roadrunner cartoons, when he looks up at the camera and holds up a sign saying, "Help," before plunging to the bottom of the cliff. On the way down, I managed to get my feet pointing down. I landed hard in the creek, making a huge splash. My legs acted as shock absorbers. I clawed my way up the bank, back to the trail, and limped miles back to my car. I felt lucky to get out of that with just a pulled hamstring. I'll never forget that moment suspended in midair, where I thought, I'm about to get really, really hurt. Man, with all these stories talking about how dangerous it is to go hiking, it's kind of a surprise so many people still enjoy doing it. So I was hiking up a very steep foothill in Washington State when the dead log next to the trail started vibrating. I stopped like WTF, then the ground started to move. A 7.0 earthquake incoming. The thing about earthquakes is, you're just minding your own business, and the one thing you take for granted, the solid ground beneath your feet, starts moving. It's very surreal. I'm in the middle of the woods on a very steep trail. I don't know how big this earthquake is, and I don't know how long it's going to last. I think it was maybe 30 seconds, but time went in slow motion. Right when it had started getting really strong and branches and dead trees started coming down, it stopped, and I noped back down to my car. It was potentially pretty dangerous given where I was. I'm glad it stopped when it did. Dang, that'd be terrifying. You just have everything above you start rolling down the hill towards you. So I was probably 4 years old in the dead of winter at my super rural childhood home. My dog, a large German Shepherd, wandered off, and I trusted him enough to follow him. My mom didn't see me leave the yard. I think she was cooking or something. Either way, following the dog wasn't the best idea. Once we got well out of sight, he stopped being in leader mode and went into protect mode. He just stuck with me and wouldn't take me out of the woods. I was too young to know to follow my footprints back or anything, and it was dangerously cold. I don't know how much time had passed, but my mom ended up calling emergency services. Cops and firefighters came out looking for me, and my dog almost mauled a cop that got too close to me. It wasn't very scary at the time, but looking back, I could have easily died in those woods. Yeah, I was one of those kids that got lost in the woods once. I honestly have no memory of it or anything, but my parents tell me it happened. So I was on a multi-week trip hiking in northern New Mexico, with afternoon showers pretty much expected every day. It was about 75 to 80 degrees and sunny, but it very quickly turned to dark, rainy, and about 35 to 40 degrees. We were in the valley on the side of a flat-top mountain, if that makes any sense. Our next campsite was over the top and below this mountain. Pretty soon lightning started striking nearby, so we had to assume the lightning position. We sat on our packs and tossed our hiking poles away. We weren't allowed to continue until the lightning was about 1.5 miles away. Pretty soon it kept getting closer and closer until I literally saw lightning strike about 200 feet away multiple times. We spent an hour and a half like this, and as it turned out, the zippers on my rain gear weren't waterproof. Never in my life have I felt the same level of, what the heck am I doing here? I mean, hiking on a nice day can be tough on its own, but once you have nature coming in to fight you as well, it can make it a pretty scary situation. So hiking in the mountains at night, a pair of eyes followed us for about a mile or so, but made absolutely no sound. I have not gone night hiking since. Man, this is like the main reason I don't go night hiking much. I mean, I go for night walks like almost every night, but I'm a little on edge about going into the woods. So in the 6th grade, our school took us to the sketchy campsite for the 3rd year in a row. We all hated it there. There were wasps in the canteen, the tents provided had no flooring, a dinky ropes course for team building, and we slept on army cots that were stiff and hard. Also, the windows of the tents opened from the outside, so you can imagine the fun the boys had with that. This particular year was the final straw that made our school see just how awful this place was. We were hiking up the side of a hill on a really narrow path. We had to walk in single file because that was how narrow the path was. We were tired, sweating, and everyone just wanted to go home. Then some kid stepped on a beehive that was on the path, and all hell broke loose. 30 kids screaming and running up and down the path. One kid tore his sweater off and threw it off the side of the hill because there were bees in it. Another kid was bitten on the lip and it swelled up to the size of a golf ball. Everyone was stung that day, and if you didn't get stung, you were one of the kids who was at the front of the line that managed to escape the swarm, but ran into a bush of poison ivy. One girl fell down in the middle of the swarm as she tried to run away, and the bees went at her. She ended up temporarily paralyzed from the waist down, and a teacher had to go and carry her out of there. Once everyone escaped, they couldn't go back because, well, bees. So they had to hike the rest of the path with their bee stings. Never again. Man, I'm sure every school would be excited to have the legal cases from something like this. So this scared the absolute crap out of me as a kid. So backstory, Adirondack 46er here. Started when I was around 11 years old. I went to the summer camp in upstate New York called Chingachgook. They take you on these 3-day hikes into the high peaks, and this year happened to be my first time hiking a high peak without my dad, so I was a bit weary. My dad has hiked literally everywhere I can think of, so I never really worried about my safety when we would go. He absolutely knows what he's doing, and it was usually just the two of us. At this summer camp, they send you out into the Adirondacks in a group of 5 to 7 kids. My group was all preteen girls, led by 2 female counselors, usually between the ages of 17 and 19. For some reason, this is regarded as perfectly safe and legal, and it never occurred to any parents or staff that the group of teenage girls could not go off into the wilderness alone for several days with no cell service. Anyways, we had been hiking in the Great Range area, and we found a lean-to, so we started setting up our camp. As we're cooking boxed rice later on in the evening by our campsite, one of the counselors spots a bear cub, so obviously, being an 18-year-old girl, she really panicked hard. The counselors were trained in survival skills and all that, but come on, at the end of the day, they're rich teenagers. And literally just runs away, leaving a group of preteens with one 17-year-old counselor in a mother bear's territory. The cub is sniffing around our food, so we run off. We return like an hour later to not only see our whole camp ransacked and all our food for the trip missing, but also 3 bears. 2 cubs and 1 massive, angry brown bear. She was super displeased to see us all wander into her campsite, and literally charged after us when we promptly ran away. Honestly, thankfully, one of the counselors we had left happened to have bear spray. All she did was spray it in the bear's general direction, and she ran directly into it. We didn't see her or the cubs again, but they ate all our food, and like I said, hikes are 3 days and we had no service. So we basically starved for 3 days, and the runaway counselor still made us hike the Great Range, 4+ high peaks, on empty stomachs. Boy, my dad was so pissed when he heard about that story. Well, that's all the responses from this thread, but I have a few of my own stories. So I live in the Salt Lake City, Utah area, and there are lots of big mountains around. So I tend to just see a mountain, say, I'm gonna go hike that one, and then just drive to the base and walk to the top. Well, some of the hikes can get a little sketchy if you're not prepared for them. I think that the one moment that really sticks out in my mind, I was hiking this really steep mountain known as Mount Olympus, and it got to a point where their very last climb to the peak, you had to like really just, it was practically rock climbing. I mean, some waves were better than others, but I ended up kind of like losing the main path to get up there. I don't even know how I ended up in this one spot, but basically I had to climb up probably like an 8 or 9 foot high rock face, and there was just a straight drop behind me, and I had no gear or anything, and I'm just like, all right, just loosely grabbing on stuff and climbing over it. And I looked down and said, I'm not risking my life for this anymore. I'm not doing these hikes anymore. I mean, I hear news stories all the time of hikers that go missing or fall off cliffs, and I'm just like, I'm surprised that doesn't happen more. Like, I mean, I feel scared of it happening every time I walk past a cliff face. And then another time I tried to hike a place called Mount Timpanogos, which is about a 14-mile round-trip hike. And we made it most of the way, but there was so much snow at the top that it was physically impossible for me to climb up, because I would literally just like climb this snow face and then slide back down. Like, I was just carrying 2 Gatorade bottles in my hands. I was literally using them like ice picks. I would climb up this steep snowy slope and I would just like stick them in the ground, like trying to pull myself up. And I ended up getting pretty high up there. But then like there were a few times where I would just like slide back down and then like slide into a bunch of mud. I mean, it just got so painful that I just had to give up. But I actually took a pretty cool video from that day of me just like right after I gave up climbing the mountain. This was me just like sliding down the hill. I just sat down on my butt, sliding down the snow, and I got a pretty cool ride out of it. So I'll share a little bit of that video at the end of this. But at the end of that hike, I was just so dead tired and exhausted that I actually like puked a few times, like at the base. Which has never happened to me before. Out of all the hikes I've ever been to, that's the only time I've ever thrown up. But anyways, that does it for all the stories. I'll just finish off this video with that recording of me sliding down the mountain. So yeah, thanks for watching. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Here we are up at Timpanogos. There's the peak. And there's where you have to go through to get to it. Slide down this mountain. Down a little bit. Alright, this looks scary. I don't know how steep this drop is. Oh man. Oh man. This is steep. Oh! Oh man, I'm still going. Oh man, I hope I don't have a hole in my pants after this.